Jake Morrison stared at the view screen in disbelief. The alien structure floating in space before him was enormous, easily 10 times the size of their ship. It hung in the darkness like a massive crystal, catching the light from the distant star and splitting it into colors he had never seen before. He had been flying military spacecraft for 8 years, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this moment. "Are you seeing this?" Claire Bennett's voice crackled through his helmet speaker. She was standing right next to him in the shuttle, but they always kept their communication systems active during away missions. Protocol demanded it. "Yeah, I'm seeing it," Jake replied. His hands moved automatically over the controls, keeping their small shuttle at a safe distance from the structure. "Command is not going to believe the footage we're sending back." Claire pressed her face closer to the window. She was a scientist, trained to observe and document, but even she seemed overwhelmed. "The energy readings are off the charts. This thing is alive, Jake. Not like a living creature, but it's generating power and responding to our presence. The structure had appeared on their sensors 3 days ago while their main ship, the Endeavor, was mapping this sector of space. Captain Hayes had authorized a small team to investigate. Jake volunteered immediately. He always volunteered. It was better than sitting on the ship doing nothing. Claire had insisted on coming too. She said this was what she had trained her whole life for, and she wasn't going to miss it. They had left the Endeavor 6 hours ago with 2 other crew members, Peters and Lou. But when they got close to the structure, something strange happened. A section of it opened up like a mouth and a beam of light shot out and hit their shuttle. The next thing Jake knew, he and Claire were separated from Peters and Liu. Their shuttle was pulled inside the structure, and now they were sitting in what looked like a docking bay. "I don't like this," Jake said. He was already running diagnostics on their shuttle systems. Everything showed green, but he had a bad feeling in his gut. Military training taught you to trust that feeling. Claire was gathering her equipment. She had 3 cases full of scanning devices, sample collectors, and recording instruments. "This is first contact, Jake. Of course it feels weird. We just need to stay calm and follow protocol. Protocol says we wait for backup when something pulls us into an alien structure against our will," Jake pointed out, but he was already unbuckling his harness. He knew they weren't going to wait. Claire was too curious, and honestly, so was he. They sealed their suits and opened the shuttle door. The atmosphere outside registered as breathable, but they weren't taking chances. The docking bay was huge and empty except for their shuttle. The walls were made of the same crystalline material as the outside, and they glowed with a soft light that seemed to come from within. "Stay close," Jake said. He had a sidearm on his belt, though he doubted it would do much good against whoever built this place. Still, it made him feel better to have it. They walked across the bay to the only visible exit, a large circular opening in the wall. As they approached, it dilated open like an eye. Claire stopped to scan it, muttering readings into her helmet recorder. Jake kept watch, his hand near his weapon. Beyond the opening was a corridor that curved away in both directions. The walls here were transparent in places, showing glimpses of other chambers and rooms. Some were empty. Others contained things that Jake couldn't identify. Strange equipment, maybe, or art, or something else entirely. "Which way?" Claire asked. Jake pointed left. "That way slopes upward, might lead to a control center or observation deck." They walked for 20 minutes, passing dozens of rooms and corridors. The structure seemed designed for beings roughly their size, which was both comforting and strange. Doors opened automatically as they approached. Lights brightened when they entered a room and dimmed when they left. It was like the place knew they were there and was guiding them somewhere. "This feels like a zoo," Jake said suddenly. The thought had been nagging at him, and now it crystallized into words. "Look at the layout. Separate chambers, observation areas, controlled environment. This is a facility for keeping things." Claire stopped walking. She looked around with new eyes, and Jake saw her expression change behind her helmet visor. "Oh no, you're right. This is a research station." Before Jake could respond, the corridor ahead of them shifted. The walls moved like liquid, reforming into a new configuration. A room appeared where there had been solid wall a moment before, and Jake felt the floor beneath his feet moving, carrying them forward whether they wanted to go or not. "Jake!" Claire grabbed his arm, but there was nothing to hold on to. The floor was smooth and frictionless. They slid into the new room and the corridor behind them sealed shut. Jake immediately tried to find a way out, but the walls were seamless. The room was circular, about 20 meters across with a high ceiling. The walls were transparent, and on the other side, Jake could see them. The aliens. There were dozens of them, standing in what looked like an observation gallery. They were roughly humanoid in shape, with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. But that was where the similarity ended. Their skin was covered in scales that shifted through different colors as they moved. Their eyes were large and dark without visible pupils. They wore no clothing, but their bodies were decorated with intricate patterns that might have been tattoos or might have been natural markings. They were watching Jake and Claire with obvious interest. "Specimens acquired," a voice said. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, and Jake's translation implant struggled to process it. "Behavioral study commencing." Claire was already scanning the walls, looking for weaknesses. Jake joined her, running his hands over the smooth surface. It was warm to the touch and slightly yielding, like touching living tissue. "There has to be a way out," he said. He tried to keep his voice calm, but his heart was pounding. He had trained for combat, for ship emergencies, for 100 different disaster scenarios, but he had never trained for being a zoo animal. Hours passed. The aliens watched them constantly, never seeming to tire or lose interest. Devices floated in the air around them, recording everything. Jake and Claire tried everything they could think of. They shouted at the aliens, demanding to be released. They searched every centimeter of their prison for a way out. They tried to break the walls with tools from Claire's equipment cases. Nothing worked. When they grew tired, cushions appeared from the floor. When they grew hungry, a section of the wall opened and food emerged on a tray. It looked like protein bars and water, though Jake suspected the aliens had synthesized it rather than raiding their shuttle supplies. "They're studying us," Claire said. She was sitting on one of the cushions, her helmet off now that they had confirmed the air was safe. Her dark hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat. "This is what I do to lab animals: create a controlled environment, provide for their needs, and observe their behavior." Jake paced the perimeter of the room for the 100th time. "We're not lab animals, we're human beings. There are laws about this, even in space." "I don't think they recognize our laws," Claire said quietly. On the second day, the aliens began showing them images. Holographic projections appeared in the air, 3-dimensional and incredibly detailed. At first, Jake didn't understand what he was looking at. Strange creatures engaged in what looked like elaborate dances or rituals. It took him several minutes to realize what he was actually seeing. "They're mating displays," Claire said. Her voice was flat, emotionless, the way it got when she was trying to stay professional about something disturbing. "Different species, different reproductive behaviors. They're showing us their research." Jake felt cold. Why would they show us this? But he already knew the answer. He could see it in the way the aliens were watching them more intently now, the way new devices had appeared in the observation gallery, the way the lighting in their chamber had changed to something warmer and more intimate. Claire's hands were shaking as she worked with her scanner. She had been analyzing everything she could detect about the structure, the aliens, their prison. Now she was focused entirely on decoding the data streams that flowed through the walls. Her implant was translating some of it, but it was slow work. "I think I know what they want," she said finally. It was the 3rd day of their captivity, and they had barely slept. The aliens never turned off the lights completely, never gave them real privacy. "Jake, I need to show you something." She pulled up the translated data on her scanner's screen. Jake read it twice, hoping he was misunderstanding. But the meaning was clear. These aliens were xenobiologists, researchers who studied reproduction across different species. They had apparently been collecting specimens from across the galaxy for years, maybe centuries. And humans were simply the latest addition to their collection. The data explained their expectations in clinical detail. They wanted to observe human mating behavior. They wanted to document the process, the biological responses, the social dynamics. And based on the patterns Claire had identified in their data, They wouldn't release their specimens until they got what they wanted. No, Jake said firmly. Absolutely not. We'll find another way out. But Claire had already tried everything. The walls couldn't be broken. Jake refused to accept their situation. He spent hours examining every surface of their prison, looking for any weakness or flaw in the design. The walls were seamless and smooth, regenerating themselves whenever he managed to scratch or dent them. The floor was equally impenetrable. Even the places where food appeared were sealed tight when not in use, impossible to pry open. Claire worked with her equipment, trying to find a technological solution. Her scanner was sophisticated, designed to analyze alien environments and technologies, but it gave her nothing useful. The crystalline material that made up their prison seemed to operate on principles that human science didn't fully understand. It was partly biological, partly technological, and completely beyond their ability to manipulate. "We've been here 4 days," Claire said. She was lying on one of the cushions, staring at the ceiling. She hadn't slept properly since their capture, and it showed in her face. "The Endeavor must have declared us missing by now. They'll be searching." Jake nodded, though he wasn't sure how much good it would do. The structure had pulled them in effortlessly. If their ship tried the same approach, they might end up captured too. And even if Captain Hayes decided to attack the structure, Jake doubted their weapons could damage it. The aliens who built this place were clearly far more advanced than humanity. The aliens themselves continued their constant observation. They never seemed to sleep or take breaks. They just watched, recording everything with their floating devices. Sometimes they would gesture to each other, their scales flashing in what might have been a form of communication. But they never tried to communicate with Jake and Claire beyond that initial message. The holographic displays continued too. Every few hours, new images would appear, showing different species engaged in reproduction. Some were vaguely familiar, resembling Earth animals in basic body structure. Others were completely alien, creatures that made no biological sense to human eyes. But the purpose was always clear. The aliens wanted Jake and Claire to understand what they expected. "They're increasing the pressure," Claire observed on the 5th day. She had noticed that the intervals between displays were getting shorter, the images more explicit. "They're getting impatient." Jake slammed his fist against the wall in frustration. It absorbed the impact without even vibrating, like hitting water. "Let them be impatient. We're not performing for them." But he could see the stress building in Claire. She was a scientist, rational and methodical, but even she had limits. The constant surveillance, the lack of privacy, the implicit threat in every holographic display. It was wearing her down. That evening, as they picked at the food the aliens provided, Claire finally voiced what they had both been avoiding. "What if there's no other way out?" she asked quietly. Her eyes were fixed on her food tray, not meeting Jake's gaze. "What if they really won't release us until they get what they want?" Jake set down his own tray. "Then we wait for rescue. The Endeavor won't abandon us." The Endeavor is a science vessel with minimal weapons. If they attack this structure, they could get destroyed. And we don't even know if Captain Hayes knows where we are. We were pulled inside so fast. "So what are you suggesting?" Jake asked, though he already knew. Claire was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm suggesting we consider all our options, including the one they want us to take." Jake stood up abruptly. "No, I'm not having this conversation." "Jake, please, just listen to me." Claire stood too, facing him across the small space. "I've been analyzing their behavior. They're not cruel. They provide for our needs. They haven't hurt us. This is purely scientific for them. They want to observe and document." "That doesn't make it right," Jake said sharply. "We're not lab rats. We're people. We have rights." "Rights mean nothing to them," Claire said. "They probably don't even understand the concept. They see us as specimens, interesting animals to study. And from their perspective, what they're asking isn't unreasonable. They want to see natural behavior." Jake shook his head. "I can't believe you're actually considering this." "I'm considering survival," Claire shot back, her voice rising. "I'm considering that we might die in here if we don't give them what they want. I'm considering that our crew might get killed trying to rescue us. I'm considering all the possibilities, Jake, which is more than you're doing. They stood glaring at each other, the tension thick between them. It was their first real argument since being captured, and Jake realized how much stress they had both been under. They were cracking, exactly as the aliens probably expected. He forced himself to take a deep breath and lower his voice. I'm sorry. You're right that we need to think about all possibilities. But Claire, this isn't just about survival. It's about who we are. If we give in to this, we're letting them define us. We're accepting that we're just animals to be studied. Claire's shoulders sagged. I know you're right. I just feel so helpless. Jake moved closer and put a hand on her shoulder. The aliens watched this too, he knew, recording the gesture and probably analyzing it for meaning. He hated that they couldn't have a private moment, couldn't comfort each other without an audience. We'll find another way, he said with more confidence than he felt. We just need to keep thinking, keep looking for weaknesses. That night they lay on opposite sides of the chamber as usual. The aliens had provided 2 sleeping areas, clearly expecting them to use separate spaces. Jake stared at the gently glowing ceiling and tried to think of solutions. But his mind kept returning to Claire's words. What if there really was no other way out? He must have eventually fallen asleep because he woke to Claire's voice in the darkness. Jake? Are you awake? Yeah, he said, sitting up. The chamber was darker than usual, though not completely black. He could still see Claire's outline across the room. I've been thinking about what I said earlier, she began, about considering all options. I was wrong to suggest we should just give them what they want. You were right. It's not about survival. It's about maintaining our humanity, our dignity. Jake felt relief wash over him. I'm glad you see it that way. But I've also been thinking about the situation from a different angle, Claire continued. What if we can use their expectations against them? What do you mean? Claire moved closer, sitting down near Jake's sleeping cushion. Even in the dim light, he could see the intensity in her eyes. They expect certain behaviors from us based on their observations of other species. But humans are unpredictable. We don't always follow biological imperatives. We have complex social structures, emotional bonds, personal choice. I'm listening, Jake said. What if we pretend to comply? Make them think they're getting what they want, but actually use that time to study them. I've noticed they get more focused, more intent, when they think something interesting is about to happen. Their attention narrows. Maybe that's when they're vulnerable. Jake considered this. It was risky, but it was the first real strategy they had developed. You mean fake them out? Make them think we're going to mate, then use their distraction to find a way out? Exactly. They're scientists, Jake. They get tunnel vision when they think they're about to observe something significant. I do it myself in the lab. You become so focused on the specimen that you forget about everything else. It was a clever idea, Jake had to admit, but it also meant playing a dangerous game. What if they call our bluff? What if they realize we're faking and punish us? They haven't shown any tendency toward punishment, Claire said. They're observers, not controllers. They want natural behavior, not forced compliance. If we can convince them we're acting naturally, they'll focus on recording and documenting. Jake thought about it for several minutes. It went against his instincts to play along with their captors in any way. But Claire's logic was sound. They needed an advantage, and this might be their only chance to get one. Okay, he said finally. But we need to plan this carefully. We can't just improvise. We need to know exactly what we're looking for and how we're going to exploit their distraction. They spent the next hour whispering together, developing their strategy. Claire explained what she had observed about the aliens' behavior, the patterns in their attention, the moments when they seemed most focused. Jake contributed his tactical training, thinking about timing and execution. By the time they finished planning, Jake felt more hopeful than he had in days. They had a plan. It might not work, but at least they were taking action instead of waiting passively for rescue or surrender. Claire stood to return to her sleeping area, but hesitated. Jake, thank you for not judging me earlier, for what I suggested. We're both under stress, Jake said. We're both trying to survive. There's nothing to judge. She nodded and moved away. Jake lay back down, his mind racing with possibilities. Tomorrow they would begin their plan. Tomorrow they would turn the tables on their captors. But as he was drifting off to sleep, Claire's voice cut through the darkness once more. This time it was barely a whisper, so quiet he almost didn't hear it. If we mate, they'll let us go. The words hung in the air for a moment. Then, without warning, the lights went out completely. The chamber plunged into absolute darkness, darker than it had been at any point during their captivity. And in that darkness, Jake heard something he hadn't heard before. Jake was on his feet instantly, his military reflexes overriding the disorientation of complete darkness. He could hear Claire moving too, the sound of her breathing faster than normal but controlled. She was scared, but she wasn't panicking. That was good. Panic would get them killed. I'm here, Claire called back. Don't move too fast. We don't want to run into each other in the dark. Jake stood still and let his eyes adjust, but there was nothing to adjust to. The darkness was absolute, without even the faint glow that had been present during their previous nights. The aliens had removed every source of light from the chamber. They're trying to manipulate us, Jake said, forcing his voice to stay calm, creating an environment that mimics privacy. Darkness, isolation, it's a classic behavioral manipulation technique. He heard Claire moving, the soft sound of her equipment being activated. A moment later, a faint blue glow appeared across the chamber. Her scanner was providing the only light now, barely enough to see by, but better than nothing. In the dim blue illumination, Jake could see Claire's face. She looked determined rather than frightened, which matched the tone of her voice when she spoke. My readings show they've changed the atmospheric composition, she said, studying her scanner's display. Nothing dangerous, but they've increased certain compounds, pheromones maybe, or chemical compounds that affect mood and behavior. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. They're trying to drug us into compliance. Probably, Claire agreed. She was tapping commands into her scanner, running analysis after analysis. But the concentrations are low. I don't think it will have much effect on us, especially now that we're aware of it. Human biology is pretty resistant to this kind of manipulation when we're consciously fighting it. Jake moved carefully across the dark chamber until he reached Claire's position. Together they examined the walls where the door should be, using the scanner's light to search for any sign of the locking mechanism. But the wall was as seamless as ever, giving no indication that a door even existed. Tell me something, Jake said as they worked. That last thing you said before the lights went out. Was that part of our plan? Were you trying to trigger their response? Claire was quiet for a moment. Honestly? I don't know. The words just came out. Maybe I was testing them, or maybe the stress is getting to me more than I realized. Well, it definitely got a reaction, Jake said. Question is, what do we do now? They spent the next hour exploring their prison in the darkness, using Claire's scanner as their only light source. The blue glow was eerie, casting strange shadows and making everything look unreal, but it revealed something they hadn't noticed before. Jake, look at this, Claire said, directing her scanner's light at a section of wall. The crystalline structure here is slightly different. See how the patterns don't quite match the rest? Jake leaned closer. She was right. The wall's surface showed a faint irregularity, barely visible even with direct light on it. What does it mean? I'm not sure yet. But it's the first real variation we've found in the walls. Maybe it's a weak point, or maybe it's where the door mechanism is hidden. Claire pressed her scanner against the wall, running deeper scans. Jake left her to work and moved around the perimeter of the chamber, testing every section of wall he could reach. In the darkness, with only the blue glow from Claire's scanner to guide him, the chamber felt smaller and more oppressive. He could almost feel the weight of the alien structure around them, thousands of tons of crystalline material holding them captive. But something else was bothering him. The aliens had been watching them constantly for days, never giving them privacy. Now they had cut the lights and sealed the door, creating the illusion of privacy. It didn't make sense unless they were still watching somehow. Claire, are they still observing us? He asked. She checked her scanner. I don't detect any visual recording devices, but that doesn't mean they're not there. They could be using technology we can't detect. Or they might have sensors built into the walls themselves. So this whole darkness thing might be an act, Jake said. They want us to think we have privacy, but they're still recording everything. Almost certainly, Claire agreed. The question is why? Why change their approach now? Jake thought about it. Frustration. We haven't given them what they want, so they're trying a different method. They think if we believe we're alone in the dark, we'll be more likely to engage in intimate behavior. Which means they still don't understand humans very well, Claire said with a hint of grim humor. Most humans don't perform better when they're frightened and manipulated. They continued their exploration, but the hours dragged on with no progress. The door remained locked. The walls showed no weaknesses except for that one irregular section, and even that revealed nothing useful in Claire's scans. The temperature began to drop slightly, not enough to be dangerous but enough to be uncomfortable. They're increasing the pressure, Claire observed, making the environment less comfortable, maybe hoping we'll seek warmth from each other. Jake would have laughed if the situation wasn't so serious. These aliens really need a course in human psychology. But as more time passed, Jake began to understand the effectiveness of the aliens' strategy. It wasn't about the darkness or the cold or even the chemical compounds in the air. It was about the isolation, the lack of control, the constant uncertainty. Even knowing they were being manipulated didn't make it easier to resist. He found himself sitting close to Claire, not for warmth or comfort, but simply because she was another human being in an alien place. They talked to pass the time, keeping their voices low even though they knew the aliens were probably listening. Jake told her about his childhood in Colorado, about learning to fly small planes with his father when he was 12 years old. He talked about joining the military, about the long training missions that took him away from Earth for months at a time. He even told her about the girlfriend who had left him because she couldn't handle the distance and uncertainty of his career. Claire shared her own stories. Growing up in Seattle with parents who were both scientists, the pressure to succeed academically, the relationship she had avoided because she was so focused on her work, her fear that she had traded a normal life for a career that might never amount to anything significant. And now here we are, she said with dark humor, finally making first contact with aliens, and it turns out they just want to watch us have sex. The universe has a twisted sense of irony. Jake found himself laughing despite everything. When we get back, you should write a paper about this. The title can be, Why First Contact Protocols Need to Include Guidelines for Dealing with Voyeuristic Alien Scientists. Assuming we get back, Claire said, and the humor drained from her voice. Jake, we need to be realistic. It's been 6 days now. If the Endeavor was going to rescue us, they would have done it by now. Maybe they're planning something, Jake suggested, but even he didn't sound convinced. Claire was quiet for a long moment. The blue glow of her scanner illuminated her face, showing exhaustion and worry. I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about maintaining our humanity and dignity, and you're right, that's important. But I'm also thinking about survival, not just for us, but for our species. What if this is a test? What do you mean? What if these aliens are evaluating humanity, deciding if we're worthy of contact or if we're just animals to be studied and dismissed? What if our refusal to cooperate makes them think we're primitive or irrational? Jake shook his head. Or what if our refusal shows them we have self-determination and won't be controlled? Claire, we can't second-guess this. If we start trying to please them or perform for them, we've already lost. I know, Claire said softly. I know you're right. I'm just tired, Jake. Tired of being watched, tired of being trapped, tired of feeling helpless. Jake understood. He felt the same way. The anger that had sustained him for the first few days was fading, replaced by a deep weariness. But he couldn't let himself give in to it. That was what the aliens wanted. Let's focus on the plan, he said. You found that irregular section of wall. What else have you learned from your scans? Claire pulled herself together, focusing on the technical problem. The crystalline material is definitely responsive to biological electrical fields. I've been documenting how it reacts when we touch it, when we move near it, even when we're just in proximity. It's subtle, but there are measurable changes in the energy patterns. Could we use that somehow? Jake asked. Maybe. The problem is scale. The changes we cause are tiny, compared to the overall energy output of the structure. It's like trying to affect an ocean by throwing in a cup of water. But what if we could amplify our effect somehow? Or focus it? Claire considered this. Theoretically, yes. The human brain generates electrical activity, especially during certain kinds of mental processes. Complex thinking, emotional responses, memory formation. If we could coordinate our brain activity somehow, create patterns that the structure isn't designed to handle, we might be able to cause a larger disruption. Jake felt a spark of hope. That's something. That's more than we had before. It's just a theory, Claire cautioned, and even if it works, I have no idea what kind of disruption it would cause. We could end up making things worse. Or we could end up opening that door. The horizon set its course back toward Earth, but the journey would take months. Jack recovered from his injuries in the medical bay, while the ship pushed through the darkness of space. Kaylin stayed aboard, learning about humanity while the crew gradually grew comfortable with having an alien among them. She spent hours in the ship's library, reading about Earth's history, studying human art and music, trying to understand the species that had saved her. Jack sat in his ready room 2 weeks after the trial, reviewing reports and messages. His ribs still ached when he breathed deeply, reminders of the warrior's strikes. Kaylin sat nearby, her silver-blue skin glowing softly in the dim light as she watched videos of Earth's cities and oceans. Your people fought wars over the right to choose their own leaders, Kaylin observed, pausing a documentary about democracy. You died by millions for concepts like freedom and equality. The Ascendants achieved peace through control, through forcing everyone to think the same way. I am beginning to understand why the galaxy might fear humanity. Fear isn't what we want, Jack replied, looking up from his work. We'd rather have understanding. We'd rather have friends. The door chimed and Katie entered without waiting for permission. Her face was tight with stress and Jack immediately knew something important had happened. Commander, we need to talk now. Jack stood, wincing slightly at the pull in his side. What's wrong? Everything, Katie said, pulling up a holographic display. We're receiving messages from all over this sector. News about what you did has spread across dozens of worlds. Some species are congratulating us. Some are threatening us. But Jack, 3 different races have sent us requests for help. They're all facing situations similar to Kaylin's. Forced marriages, slavery contracts, traditions that trap people in lives they don't want. They're asking if humanity would help them too. Jack felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. He exchanged a look with Kaylin, who had stopped her video and was listening intently. What had started as one woman's plea for freedom had become something larger, something that neither of them had anticipated. Show me, Jack said. Over the next hour, Katie displayed message after message. A delegation from the Krell Union wanted asylum for their daughter, who faced a similar forced bonding with a rival clan. A group of Meridian rebels had sent encrypted communications, asking if humans would stand with them against Ascendant expansion into their territory. Trade organizations were reaching out, curious about these bold newcomers who had challenged an ancient empire and won. It's spreading faster than we can track, Katie explained. Every oppressed group in this sector sees what you did as a symbol. They think humanity is some kind of galactic freedom fighter, here to save them from tyranny. Jack ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration he'd had since childhood. We're one ship. We can't fight an empire. We can't save everyone who asks for help. But shouldn't we try? Danny asked, entering the ready room with a data pad in hand. I mean, isn't that what we should stand for out here? We proved we could challenge the empire. Now other people want to know if we'll stand with them too. We're explorers, not warriors, Katie argued. Earth Command is going to lose their minds when they hear about this. We've already created an interstellar incident. If we start helping every rebel group and runaway that contacts us, we could trigger a war. Kaylin spoke quietly, her voice carrying a weight of guilt. This is my fault. I brought this burden to you. I made you a symbol when you only wanted to explore and learn. Jack shook his head firmly. No, you gave us a choice just like we gave you one. The question now is what kind of precedent we want to set. Do humans stand for something meaningful out here among the stars? Or do we only help when it's convenient and safe? The debate continued for hours, with Katie and Danny representing 2 different views of humanity's role in galactic politics. Katie wanted caution and safety, to avoid unnecessary conflicts. Danny wanted action and principle, to prove that humanity meant what they said about freedom. Jack listened to both sides, feeling torn between them. Finally, Jack made a decision. We can't save everyone. We can't fight every battle. But we can do something important. We can tell our story. We can show the galaxy what happened and why it matters. We can make it clear that humanity stands for certain principles, and leave it to others to decide what that means for them. He recorded a message that would be broadcast on every major communication channel in the sector. In it, he explained what had happened with Kalen, carefully and honestly. But more importantly, he talked about why he had made his choice. He spoke about human history, about the struggles for freedom that had defined their species across centuries. He talked about the belief that all thinking beings deserved the right to choose their own paths in life. "We're not conquerors," Jack said, looking directly into the camera. "We're not saviors who think we have all the answers. We're just people who believe that freedom matters. We believe that no one should be forced to give up their thoughts or their choices because of tradition or power. If that makes us dangerous to empires built on control, then so be it. Humanity has arrived in the galaxy, and we're not going to pretend we don't see injustice when it's right in front of us." The message was broadcast across the sector, and the response was immediate. Some species praised humanity's courage and idealism. Others called them naive and reckless, young fools who didn't understand how the galaxy really worked. The Ascendant Empire issued formal warnings, stating that any interference in their internal affairs would be considered an act of war. But something had changed. Humanity was no longer unknown. They were now a factor in galactic politics, and their position was clear to everyone. Young species across the sector watched the broadcast and felt hope. Old empires watched it and felt concern. Everyone, regardless of their opinion, now knew that humans were willing to act on their beliefs. Back on Earth, the reaction was mixed and complicated. Government officials argued about whether Jack should be court-martialed or given a medal for his actions. Some saw him as a dangerous loose cannon who had created an unnecessary crisis. Others saw him as a hero who had announced humanity's values to the galaxy in the clearest possible way. Admiral George Lane, who commanded Earth's deep space fleet, sent a direct message to Jack. The Admiral was an older man with gray hair and eyes that had seen decades of military service. His face on the screen was stern but not angry. "Morrison, you've created one hell of a situation here," Lane said bluntly. "Half of command wants to lock you up. The other half wants to put you in charge of first contact protocols. The diplomats are having fits. The military is scrambling to figure out our capabilities. And every news organization on Earth is calling you either the bravest man alive or the most reckless." Jack waited, knowing there was more coming. "But I'll tell you what I think," Lane continued. "I think you reminded everyone why we went to the stars in the first place. Not to hide or to conquer, but to be who we are. Loud and proud, standing up for what we believe in. That takes guts, Morrison. Come home. We need to talk about what happens next because, like it or not, you've changed humanity's relationship with the galaxy. We can't go back to being quiet explorers anymore." As the horizon continued its long journey home, Jack spent more time with Kalen. She was adapting to life among humans, learning their customs and language, though her skin still shifted colors with her emotions in ways that fascinated the crew. She and Jack often stood together on the observation deck, watching the stars stream past. "I changed your life," Jack said one evening, his voice reflective, "but you changed humanity's entire path forward. I hope we're ready for it." Kalen placed her hand over his and that familiar spark of energy danced between their skin. Over the months they had grown closer in ways that went beyond the formal relationship of protector and protected. Jack had learned to read the subtle changes in her skin tone that indicated her moods. Kalen had developed a sense of humor that often caught him off guard. "Your species has been preparing for this moment since you first looked at the night sky and dared to wonder what was out there," Kalen said softly. "The galaxy needed someone like humanity, Jack. It needed a species young enough to still believe in ideals, strong enough to stand up for them, and brave enough to face the consequences. Even if the consequence is war?" Jack asked. "Especially then," Kalen replied, "because some things are worth fighting for. You taught me that. Freedom, choice, the right to decide your own path. These aren't just human values. They're universal truths that older empires have forgotten. You helped me remember what it means to be free. Now you're helping the galaxy remember too." "I didn't do it alone," Jack said. "You chose to trust us, to believe that a species you'd never met might actually mean what they say about freedom." Kalen smiled, a gesture she had learned from humans and now used naturally. "Then we chose each other in our own way. Is that not what this has always been about? The right to choose?" Jack squeezed her hand gently, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, other people were watching those same stars and feeling hope for the first time in years. Somewhere empires were looking at. The horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel to find Earth's orbit filled with ships. Jack stood on his bridge, staring at the massive fleet that had assembled to greet them. The entire deep space fleet was there, along with vessels from 3 other species that Jack had never seen before. Their ships mixed with human vessels, creating a tapestry of different technologies and designs against the backdrop of Earth's blue and white surface. "That's not just a welcoming committee," Katie said quietly, studying her sensors. "That's a fleet preparing for something big." Jack's communication panel lit up with an incoming call. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to Admiral George Lane, commander of Earth's deep space operations. He was a man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much of war during the early colonial expansion. His expression was serious but not angry. "Morrison, dock with Command Station Alpha immediately," Lane ordered. "We have representatives from Earth's government, the military council, and ambassadors from 3 allied species waiting to speak with you. This is bigger than anything we've dealt with before." The docking procedure took an hour. When Jack and Kaylin finally entered the massive conference chamber, they found it packed with people. Government officials in formal suits sat at one end of a long table. Military officers in crisp uniforms occupied the other end. Between them sat 3 aliens that represented species Jack had only heard about in the messages they'd received during their journey home. Admiral Lane stood at the head of the table. He gestured for Jack and Kaylin to take seats near the center. "Let's get straight to the point," Lane began. "Commander Morrison, what you did 6 months ago has forced Earth into a position we weren't ready for. The Ascendant Empire has issued an ultimatum. Either we hand over Kaylin and publicly apologize for interfering in their affairs, or they consider it an act of war." A murmur ran through the room. Jack felt Kaylin tense beside him, but he kept his expression calm and neutral. "At the same time," Lane continued, "we've been contacted by 12 different species asking humanity to lead a coalition against Ascendant expansion. Some have been under their control for centuries. Others are facing similar situations to what Kaylin experienced. They all saw your message, Morrison, and they all believe humanity represents something new in this galaxy, a force for freedom rather than conquest." A diplomat in an expensive suit spoke up, his voice sharp with frustration. "Commander, you're asking us to potentially start a war with an empire that has existed for 10,000 years. We've been exploring space for less than 50 years. Our military is tiny compared to theirs. Do you understand the risk you've created?" Jack looked directly at the diplomat. "I understand perfectly, sir. I understood it when I made my choice. But I had to ask myself a question. What's the point of reaching the stars if we abandon our principles the moment they become inconvenient? What kind of species do we want to be out here?" Danny, who had been allowed into the meeting as the Horizon's senior engineer, spoke up. "With respect, sir, the Ascendants are powerful because everyone is afraid of them. But they're locked into their old ways of thinking. Humanity is adaptable. We're innovative. We don't give up when things get hard. Those are advantages that matter more than age or size." One of the aliens stood. She was a Krell, her scales shimmering in shades of blue and green under the conference room lights. Her eyes were large and golden, and when she spoke, her voice had a musical quality. "My name is Senna of the Krell Union. Commander Morrison's actions gave my daughter the courage to run from a forced union with a rival clan. She is safe now because humanity showed the galaxy that the old ways could be challenged. My people pledge our warships to any coalition that stands against the Empire's tyranny." Another alien rose, this one tall and thin with skin that seemed to shift between different shades of purple. "I am born of the Meridian Collective. We have faced Ascendant expansion for 50 years. They take our worlds and force our people into their bonding rituals, erasing our culture one mind at a time. We offer our technology and our knowledge to humanity's cause." The third alien was surprising. His skin was silver blue like Kaylin's, marking him as an Ascendant. But his robes were different, marked with symbols that Jack didn't recognize. "I am Torin of the Liberators. We are Ascendants who reject the old empire. Commander Morrison's actions have inspired a civil war within our own species. Hundreds of ships have joined our cause. We fight for the right to choose our own bonds, to think our own thoughts. We will stand with humanity." Admiral Lane let the weight of those statements settle over the room. "So the question before us is clear. Do we apologize and hand over Kaylin to preserve peace? Or do we stand by what Commander Morrison did and accept the possibility of war?" The debate that followed was intense and heated. Some officials argued for caution, for protecting Earth above all else. Others argued for principle, saying that humanity couldn't back down now without losing all credibility. Military officers discussed strategy and capability. Diplomats worried about casualties and economic impacts. Through it all, Jack sat quietly, feeling the weight of every word. This was his fault, his choice that had brought them to this moment. If Earth went to war, every death would be on his conscience. Finally, after 3 hours of argument, Admiral Lane called for silence. "We've heard every position. Now we need to make a decision. The government has authorized me to make the final call on military matters, so I'll tell you what we're going to do." The room went completely quiet. "We're not handing over Kalen," Lane said firmly. "We're not apologizing for standing up for freedom. Instead, we're going to issue something called the Human Accord for Freedom. It's a document that lays out humanity's principles clearly. Any being, any species seeking freedom from oppression will find an ally in humanity. We won't start wars, but we'll finish them. We won't force our beliefs on others, but we'll defend those beliefs when challenged." He turned to look directly at Jack. "Commander Morrison, you're being promoted to Admiral. You'll lead the First Contact Defense Fleet, a joint force of human and allied vessels. Your mission is to protect those seeking freedom while avoiding open war if possible. But if the Ascendants force the issue, you're authorized to respond with full military force." Jack stood slowly, feeling the magnitude of what had just been decided. "Sir, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. I'm an explorer, not a fleet commander." "You're exactly the right person," Lane replied, "because you understand what we're really fighting for. This isn't about territory or resources. It's about the right of thinking beings to choose their own paths. That's a principle worth defending, even against an empire that's existed for 10,000 years." The Human Accord for Freedom was drafted over the next week. It was a simple document, but it was powerful in its clarity. Humanity stated its position plainly. Freedom of thought and choice were fundamental rights that should belong to all thinking beings. Forced bonding, slavery, and any practice that removed a being's ability to choose their own path were violations of those rights. Humanity would support any individual or species seeking to escape such practices. The declaration was broadcast across the galaxy. The response was immediate and dramatic. The Ascendant Empire recalled all its ambassadors from human space and began gathering its fleets. But dozens of other species sent messages of support. Some offered military assistance. Others offered technology or resources. Species that humanity had never even heard of reached out, saying they had been waiting for someone to stand up to the Empire. Jack was given command of a fleet that grew larger each day. 50 human vessels formed the core, including the Horizon, which he kept as his flagship. The Krell contributed 20 powerful warships, each one equipped with weapons that could crack planets. The Meridians provided advanced sensor technology and shield systems that far exceeded human capabilities. And the Liberators brought knowledge of Ascendant tactics and weaknesses that would prove invaluable. On the eve of the fleet's first deployment, Jack found himself standing in the observation lounge of the Horizon, looking down at Earth. The planet looked peaceful from orbit, its oceans shining blue in the sunlight, its clouds swirling in gentle patterns. It was hard to believe that somewhere beyond the edge of human space, fleets were gathering for a war that might change the galaxy forever. Kalen entered the lounge quietly and came to stand beside him. Over the 6 months since he had claimed her, they had grown close in ways that went beyond simple friendship. She had learned to read his moods as easily as he had learned to interpret the color shifts in her skin. They had shared stories about their different worlds, their hopes and fears, their beliefs about what made life worth living. "Do you regret it?" Kalen asked, her voice soft. "If you could go back to that moment in your conference room, knowing everything that would come from your choice, would you still claim me?" Jack was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the question seriously. "Every single day I wonder if I made the right choice," he admitted. "Not because of you, but because of everything it started.